happy to have Joel Korytko on today for an interview. Joel is a PhD student at the University of Oxford. He's working on Septuagint Exodus. And before that, he was a student at LXX Seminaries at Trinity Western University, working under the supervision of the Wevers Institute fellows there. Also, Joel recently won the Wevers Prize from the International Organization for Septuagint and Cognate Studies for his essay titled "The Death Penalty in Old Greek Exodus in Light of Greco-Egyptian Legal Formulations." And I think we'll hear a bit more about this topic later. But for now, welcome, Joel.
Good to be here, Jean.
Nice to have you. So first things first, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to pursue graduate studies?
Sure, yeah. So my journey into biblical studies begins a while back, kind of just before college. At 18, I became a Christian. I'm here in British Columbia, Canada, a small town, Chilliwack, corn town, and said I wanted to go and learn more about the Bible at the time. Was really interested and passionate about it. So there's a college nearby in Abbotsford called Columbia Bible College. It's a Mennonite college. And there I focused on the biblical languages. I was really passionate to understand the Bible in its original languages. So I ended up teaching myself New Testament Greek, and then took a suicide Hebrew course with Ken Esau there, which was quite the experience. He quite memorable. He said, if you have a girlfriend, break up with her. If you have a job, quit it, and then take this class. I actually did break up with my girlfriend at the time.
It was a Hebrew class, they said?
Yeah, the Hebrew class, suicide Hebrew. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Wow. And then I learned Hebrew there, and was really interested in exegesis, specifically a little less on the theological, philosophical side, more on the specific exegesis of a given text. And there were great professors there: Ken Esau, Michael Zook, Jerry Pauls. And at the end, near the ending of my bachelor's degree, I went to Moody Bible Institute for a little bit. I was in the kind of the Reform circles back then. That was the theological perspective that I had, and so I wanted to focus a bit on that. And then from there, I ended up at Trinity Western, LXX Seminaries. And the reason I looked there specifically was that they had a particular focus on the biblical languages. At LXX and the MTS and Septuagint was really the only one I could find nearby that had an extensive master's level program for those two languages.
Interesting. So, yeah, Septuagint studies is sometimes considered an obscure field. So how come, or how is it that you gravitated towards this area of study?
Yeah. If I'm honest, I went into the MTS with specialization in Septuagint at LXX, not really caring about the Septuagint in any way. There's not really a noble pursuit or anything here. Or what did get me into it, though, well, one was the biblical languages that they required there. It was the only program that had both Hebrew, Greek intensive. So I said, I'm going to do this. But then, quite to my surprise, I became quite interested in the Septuagint itself because of a series of papers I wrote for professors there. I looked at different text types and the discrepancies you find between the Hebrew text and then the Greek text cited in the New Testament. I started to see that there were different versions of Greek text floating around during the New Testament period. And then also, and this was what really fascinated me, was that writers like Paul, they didn't seem to be too concerned with matching exactly the Hebrew Old Testament when they were citing the version he cites, versions he cites. There was less of a concern to be exact to what at least the Hebrew text that I was reading, Masoretic text. And so that really intrigued me. And then I kind of had a conversion moment. The scales fell from my eyes, and I saw the importance of the Greek versions for the interpretation of the Bible, and haven't really looked back since.
Okay, great. So I mentioned earlier, and you also stated that you spent some time at or with the Wevers Institute fellows. What have you found most beneficial in the training that you received there?
There's a lot I could say about that, from the quality of their scholarship to the quality of their character. They showed me, first off, what really kind of strikes home. They showed a great concern for me intellectually and personally. at the start, or I had some health issues that they worked with me through, and they were nothing but accommodating and sympathetic. So that really did mean a lot to me. But also, in hindsight, they put up with some lousy ideas and papers that while I was sorting through my own beliefs and crafting my skills, and really helped me kind of hone in on what it is to do good research, while at the same time probably going, "Ooh, all right," through a couple of the things that I was sorting through. Yeah, so they're very accommodating, which I can't appreciate enough in hindsight. They helped me get a better grasp on the field, to learn to ask the right questions, and also to search the right sources, particularly Dr. Larry Perkins and Dr. Rob Hebert. They invited me to work on extracurricular projects and they were really formative for me, whether that was being a research assistant, a teacher's assistant, collating manuscripts, helping me apply for certain scholarships. They were there for that, and I couldn't be more grateful. If there was a desire, or if there is a desire to work hard, they really do take a student under their wings, like they did for me. And so if you show that, they're nothing but there for you. Particularly Dr. Perkins, I have to thank for helping me find a master's thesis. He had a hunch something strange was going on in the legal sections of Greek Exodus, and that's where I ended up working on. That led me to my dissertation now.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yes, you're currently completing your doctoral studies at University of Oxford. Can you tell us about your current research project, how you came to be interested in the topic, which you just mentioned a little bit, but maybe you could expand on that a little bit more, and how far along you are maybe, and perhaps even share some examples of your findings?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. My master's thesis led me to continue research in the same topic at the doctoral level. As much as I wish I could say that I love to read thousands of ancient laws and publications on them, it's not true. My passion for this work comes from the thrill of finding new insights, which I think I have here. I mean, everybody loves Exodus up to chapter 21. And pretty much everybody goes, okay, skip. Let's get to the next part. Not everybody, in devotional reading at least. I know that I'm guilty of it in the past. So I understand the hesitancy to approach chapters like this, but there are really interesting things going on in the Greek translation. And so my doctoral research is focused on the Greek Covenant Code. That is approximately chapters 21 to 23 of Exodus. Mm-hmm. And long and short of it is that I think, in as much as the original text is reproduced by the Göttingen edition, so our critical edition that we typically use in the field, I believe the translators significantly altered some of the laws away from the Hebrew meaning in order to accommodate the legal and moral milieu of Ptolemaic Egypt at the time. The original translation of Exodus, for those who might not know, took place, it seems, sometime in the 3rd century BCE. So I focus on the law and legal language at that time, and the time kind of right before and right after, in as much as it survives. Mm-hmm. The project, kind of how I go about it, the first thing I do, I try to always do, is to look at the way that the translator has rendered the Hebrew text, and then try to explain any sort of surprising or unexpected translation choice from a linguistic level, kind of simplest explanation first. I often find that the reason for a particular choice can be explained due to constraints or concepts or turns of phrase found in either Hebrew or Greek. Again, the simplest explanation is probably the one you should go with. But once you've done that work, there are some choices in the laws of 21 to 23 that don't really fit these explanations. And this is where it gets really interesting. Mm-hmm. So could I give an example?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so there's a phrase, Moth, he will be put to death, this phrase for the death penalty, capital punishment that you see throughout these laws. In the Hebrew text, this phrase comes often in succession, law after law. The Greek translator uses a few different renderings. Two of the main translations, not all of them, but two of the main ones are thanato thanatousto and thanato teletato. So two different phrases there for the same Hebrew phrase. Of course, the first explanation, and the one that predominated scholarship before this, is to say that the translator was simply using synonyms or synonymous phrases. But if you look into Greek law and the terminology used for the death penalty, these phrases would not be considered synonymous. To put it shortly, thanato thanatousto would be perceived by Greek readers at the time as the death penalty, so that is the death penalty. coinciding with the Hebrew intent. And there are a few reasons to say this, and for those explanations, it would take a little while. I don't think it's the best time for that. So I would point people to the upcoming article in the Journal of Septuagint and Cognate Studies. On the other hand, so assuming that thanato teleftato would not be understood as the death penalty. Not only is this phrase an idiom, which you can find in the Greek legal orators and elsewhere, but so that would be the century previous. But there are no cases at all in formal Greek law codes where teleftato is used as a term to condemn someone to death. It's just not, you don't use that term. And Greek law is quite fixed when it comes to terminology. So when you change terms like this, they would immediately notice that. It's something that's very important to them, as it is today in legal fields. You have to use the right terminology in your contract, or else you're going to end up owing somebody this much money or whatever, right? It has to be exact. And we're like that. And so the change would not be unappreciated from a Greek legal perspective. So then, what does that mean for the laws where thanato teleftato occurs? Well, this phrase, I think, will be understood as an imprecation. That is, these laws no longer condemn someone to death, but instead they only state a disapproval of the action. So kind of a slap on the wrist, but no substance to a punishment. This use of imprecations is actually documented in Greek law, that you'll use an imprecation when there is no legal recourse. And so I've heard that as well in the paper, and it'll be documented in the dissertation that's coming. Now, where this gets more fascinating is to look at to look at the laws where these changes occur, so the teleftato appears, and then compare them to the Ptolemaic legal situation at the time. So both laws concerning parental mistreatment in Exodus 21 condemn the violator to death in the Hebrew text. So that's for physically striking a parent, and then also for cursing a parent. The Greek translator changes cursing to speaking ill of, but that's another topic altogether. So if you look at the Greek legal attitude towards physically harming parents, you can see that they did, on occasion, prescribe the death penalty for this kind of action. But when it comes to negatively speaking about parents, they didn't proceed with such a penalty. So there is a difference there in Greek law. So then you go back now to the Septuagint, and we find that the translator has removed the death penalty from the law talking about speaking negatively about parents, but has left the death penalty in the law about physically harming parents. And this coincides and matches up with the legal and moral framework of Greeks at the time. It also generally matches the 4th century and Ptolemaic literary and documentary legal evidence. So I think there's a strong foundation there. So then what we seem to have is an example of the translator intentionally departing from what the Hebrew text said in order to conform to the Greek translation, or in order to conform the Greek translation to the norms of the day. I do need to say there are other options for influence here. So you could think about Second Temple parallels, Dead Sea Scrolls parallels, rabbinics. But as far as I'm aware, and I've chatted with quite a few people, some of my colleagues at Oxford in rabbinics and in these fields, and I don't find any direct parallels. There might be parallels in maybe a hermeneutical method employed or something like that, but the actual changing due to this the subject matter at hand, I don't think there are parallels.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The parallel with Ptolemaic law is pretty striking there. So that's very intriguing. And also for the fact that the differences appear to be very subtle at first glance in the Greek text of Exodus until you dig deeper. So do you have another example that you can share with us?
Yeah, I got another one. This one, this might be I've shared this one with others at Oxford, but I think this might be the world premiere for it being outside of those circles. So it's a good one. It's a bit more dramatic. So take a hold of your seat, if you will. So Exodus 22, 18, 19 in the Septuagint version, the numbering of the verses is a bit different. The Hebrew text there says that anyone laying with an animal shall be put to death. So a law on bestiality. The Greek version, however, as far as I can tell, it changes the meaning completely. So we're going a totally different direction now. The Greek should be read as any wild animal that lays with a domestic animal, you shall kill. So the law is not about bestiality, but about animal husbandry. The law now only states to put to death an animal, and not a human.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a big difference. It's striking. How the translator makes the change is by taking advantage of the Greek language and its system of gender. So by translating the word any in the neuter gender instead of the masculine gender, the meaning changes from any human laying with an animal to any animal, and the implication being any wild animal. In this way, the translator stays superficially close to what the Hebrew says, but in fact changes the meaning from the Greek angle completely.
Mm-hmm.
Which is an interesting mode of translation. The technique employed there is certainly worth a great deal of discussion, why the translator decides to stay so superficially close to the text yet changes it. So there are other considerations, counter arguments that could come from this claim. I am very aware. I deal with them in my dissertation. Those who have a keen eye probably already opened up the text and pointed to, there's a masculine personal pronoun at the end of tous, and say, oh, what about that? Well, there's good reason to suspect it wasn't part of the original text, but it's all dealt with again in the work I'm doing, and this is not the format or medium to discuss that. I was hoping to present at SBL this year, this particular research. I wasn't able to attend, unfortunately. But okay, so we've got that aspect of it. Then you again look to the Ptolemaic context, and you can see that the law coincides with what we know about Greek law concerning sexual misconduct. So when it came to private sexual matters, things something like bestiality, they turned a blind eye from what we know in the classical sources and Ptolemaic period, and Egyptian sources as well. So in classical law, this was the case. In Ptolemaic Egypt, even more the case, where there would be no consequences for what we might call deviant sexual activity. It wouldn't be permitted by the powers that be to put to death an individual for these kinds of acts, and such a law that did put to death someone for these kinds of acts would be crude in Greek eyes for certain. So then, the translator of Exodus, it seems to me, finds a creative way to change the law. It's quite a wild claim, but I do think it holds up to scrutiny, which it leads to some questions. Questions like what do for both of these laws I've discussed now, what do changes like these mean for Second Temple Judaism, for Septuagint studies, or the like? Questions like, how did this translator view law? How was it binding? Why did the translator feel free to make these kinds of changes? Why did the translator superficially represent the text at the same time? Because it seems almost like the translator's trying to have their pie and eat it too. We're going to stay close to the Hebrew, but I'm changing the meaning. So what's going on there? Is he playing to two different audiences, to Greeks and to Jews, and maybe pulling the wool over some people's eyes who don't understand Greek very well? I don't know, or don't know Greek law very well. When it comes to how they viewed law, how the translator might have viewed law, there's quite a bit of work done on this. So looking at ancient Near Eastern law codes, how a code like that of the Hebrew text that is earlier, these kinds of law codes, from what we know, were not necessarily they weren't viewed as the minimum sentence or something, these kind of penalties, but rather might have been a way to display the wisdom of a particular king or of a people group, and not necessarily the only way to deal with something. So was that the way the translator still had some of that idea in his mind? Perhaps there's other Second Temple hermeneutics going on here. We know that as things developed, particular individuals gained authority and interpretation, even if that departs sometimes from the text in significant ways. So perhaps that's going on here. I'm not quite certain at this point. I'm still thinking through these things. Another question is, why does this seem to happen in Exodus more than elsewhere? I'm not making claims for other books. My work does affect some of the other Pentateuch, particularly Leviticus, and then a little bit with Numbers. But these changes seem to me, I haven't done work necessarily I haven't done as much work in Leviticus, but in Exodus it seems to be predominant. I don't find these kinds of changes elsewhere yet. So I've wondered, why is this happening in Exodus? And we know that there was quite a the book seems to be quite popular in 3rd century BCE Egypt. So you've got Hecataeus talking about the Exodus narrative at the end of the 4th century. You've got Ezekiel the tragedian, the famous the Exegoge. You've got Artapanus, among others, who reference this Exodus story. So perhaps it had something to do with the translator expecting Greek readers to read this and was trying to appease that audience. I don't know. I'm still working through these conclusions. What I am trying to make certain is the text linguistic data that these conclusions are warranted, that the meaning has changed, and then to finding the sourcing for that meaning, and then making some potential hypotheses as to why this has happened. But those are a little less certain.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Yeah, there is, like you say, the observations of what's going on in the translation, and then all of the implications, which are really fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to reading what you're writing on the topic. I was wondering what other projects you're involved with at the moment or plan to work on in the near future?
Yeah, probably the biggest project I'm working on right now is working with Dr. Larry Perkins on the Society of Biblical Literature commentary series on Septuagint Exodus. There's a whole series, all the books are being done, and we're working on this together. He's focused on narrative. I am, to a degree, focused on the legal materials, and we're also working together in some of those materials. And that's takes up the majority of my time. But I have some other articles for some publications that are in the works, and then also have been asked to contribute to the historical and theological lexicon of the Septuagint. Few items in that entry.
Sounds great. So what would you recommend for people interested in pursuing research in this field? I mean, there's a lot of people watching our interviews that are beginners, other are further along. So how should one prepare themselves in terms of coursework, for example?
That's a great question, and one I wish I would have heard an answer to a long time ago. Not that I'll give the definitive one, but some of my ideas would be that, first off, more than anything, if you're just beginning a journey into biblical studies and perhaps Septuagint, learn the biblical languages. Start with Hebrew and Greek, and then I would say include Aramaic in that, since if you're going to focus on the Septuagint, you need to recognize that that language was influential at the time of the translations, and that it would be really helpful for you to know. So that's already a big thing to ask, but you could just start working on it now, and you can do it. You don't need to be some sort of genius polyglot. I'm definitely not. It just takes a little bit of work every day for a while, and you'll be there in no time. If possible, one thing I've become more convinced of in the last few years is that you should learn to compose in these languages, learn to communicate as much as you can. There are a lot of really good resources out there right now. Actually, at Axe and at Trinity, I know David Sigrist is running some programming there along the lines of the communicative approach to both Greek and Hebrew. So something like that, because it's really important to recognize not just what was translated, but what could have been said, what could have occurred there. That helps you kind of think through the process, and that takes a long time. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it either, but it certainly gets you further along when you're asking questions. And then also focus, if you're a beginner, just focus on something that you're interested in. I got into this not because if someone would have said you're going to be doing work in text criticism of the Hebrew Bible based in Septuagint when I first started, I would have just put it down and done something else. That's not interesting to me. That's interesting to some people, and that's great, but that's not what I particularly cared about. I got into it through, as I said, seeing the different text types in the New Testament and these discrepancies and whatnot. So find something that interests you and go from there, and then work your way in. And now I care about text criticism, but at the beginning you probably could have never got me in. So do that. Read something like an introduction by Jobes and Silva. You know, there are a few introductions out there that are really good, and start to see what interests you and head down that path. But if you have done that and you've got some of the languages under your belt, maybe start learning things that relate to the secondary literature. So modern German, French, or there's a lot written in those languages. That will help with secondary lit. If you get time, maybe this is more for doctoral work, but you could branch out into Syriac, Latin, other languages that affect the field. There's a lot of language work, and you want to get started as early as you can. I kind of wish I had for some of these. But if you're looking towards doctoral studies, first off, I'm really excited. We need more Septuagintialists. Everyone has a doctorate in NT. Everyone has a doctorate in OT. Do something new. There's lots of room to look for a niche that you could take time to learn about and make a new scholarly contribution towards.
Mm-hmm.
It's an open field. There's so much that can be done and is being done. And so if you want to find new things, if you don't want to kind of rehash the same arguments, that's really doesn't sound nice, but there's new things to be found. And you can also think interdisciplinary in an interdisciplinary way, finding connections kind of like I am. I spent probably half of my time in my doctorate just learning about Greco-Egyptian law. And it's really fascinating, and you can actually make connections you wouldn't be able to if you stuck to just the biblical studies route. So finding something like that, and then learning to navigate some of the new technologies, I think is important, probably at a master's and at a doctoral level. So that's papyri databases, inscriptional databases, TLG. These are all online resources that help you lexicographically, contextually, helping you read texts that you might not have a translation for, or you don't want to spend your entire day translating. Getting accustomed to these would be really helpful for somebody, especially at, I'd say, the master's and doctoral level.
Mm-hmm. Great, lots of good advice. If proficiency in ancient languages is so important, as well as you mentioned, the number of tools that are available online now that are not always the easiest to learn. So maybe one last question. How do you see the field of Septuagint studies in terms of underworked or contested areas, or even future avenues of research?
Yeah. First and foremost, I don't pretend to have an omniscient eye towards everything that's going on in Septuagint. There's a lot and a lot of people working. What I can speak to would be from my own research and my own experience. And that would be to say, if what I'm finding is true, then I would encourage those who might be interested in the Septuagint to read from the Greek angle, to look to start exploring elsewhere. Because I mean, we've seen a lot in the past, and great work done for using the Septuagint for text criticism of the Hebrew Bible, but not as much done reading it from the Greek angle, Greek side of things. Mm-hmm. I think you often presuppose that the Greek text represents the Hebrew text, and that's the way it is, even if there are peculiar differences like the ones I've been mentioning in today. I'm hoping more stuff like what I've found will be discovered in the near future, and that we can start to see more of the interpretive and cultural influences on the text. In a similar way, perhaps looking at genre, because for me, the legal genre has influenced the way the translator of Exodus has translated. And I've only given a couple of examples. I've gone through all of the laws in 21 to 23 and really tried to look for significant either alterations or accommodations, or even just using the language of the day. So you'll find just a certain translation, certain terms that only occur once, only in these laws, that just match the legal language of the day. So clearly the translator had a mind towards the type, the linguistic register, the way that you would talk in Greek law, with Greek law, and was applying that to the text. And so if that's true, then, I mean, you could apply various different genres in Greek literature and start looking at the Septuagint and where they match up, and see if you could find some of these things. I know some of my colleagues at Oxford are doing that with poetry and other books, and seem to be having some fruitful results. So that would be somewhere to go.
Okay, great. Yeah, these are undoubtedly fascinating areas of study. And as you state, there's so much to do in the field of Septuagint studies. And yeah, it's true that the field is wide open. Joel, thank you for agreeing to this interview and for sharing a bit about yourself and your research today. I wish you a speedy completion of your doctoral work.
Thank you so much. It was great to chat with you.